The third album on your list, Public Enemy's It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back. Why does this album mean so much to you? This is kind of the the outlier in
Yeah,
your
well,
five.
I went like everybody as a kid, you go through phases, if as a lover of music, where you were just deeply into a genre or a style. And I went through like a pretty strong hip hop phase, like grade 7, grade 8. And this, I think, might have been one of the first cassettes I ever bought. And it was mostly because I had heard Black Steel in the Hour of Chaos and been like, wow, man, this is hip hop. This is what hip hop's supposed to be. And like I was popping and locking with like my hat on sideways and my overalls. Like I was full on like mid to late 80s like rapper wannabe. And this was the first cassette I had bought that like felt like it was more than just Young MC or Rob Bass and DJ Easy Rock. Like this was like real deal, real hip hop. And I played that tape on my little boombox in my bedroom nonstop, front to back. And it was one of the only cassettes I had that my mom really liked.
Your
And
mom liked this album?
yeah, she thought it was
I'm
great.
impressed.
Yeah. I mean, my mother's from Trinidad and Tobago, and she's, she likes ska and calypso and, reggae and all that stuff. And I would, there's interludes in this record that are like snippets from live performances. And she was just like, oh man, like they're very angry, but I really want to hear what they have to say. And it's another one, like for me, the production on the album is just like, there's, as I said earlier, like there's so many samples, but you can't really tell what any of it is. And, the Bomb Squad and Hank Shockley and Terminator X, like they really went above and beyond. And again, Chuck D had something to say that was like really, especially in New York in the 80s. It's not like New York is now. Like New York in the 80s was a dangerous place. And, he had things to say about, racism and drug abuse and social consciousness. But on the other hand of the side, side of the coin, you had Flavor Flav, being Flavor Flav,
The
especially
ultimate
young
hype
Flavor
man.
Flav, the ultimate hype man who was funny. But if you listen to like, I Can't Do Nothing For You, Man, like it's about dealing with the homeless population and having standoffs with people you don't know and strangers. And there's actually more to it than just being pretty hilarious. I mean, and then you tie in like, Professor Griff and the S1Ws and the, this like ultra militant sort of Black Pantherish sort of thing. And I mean, this is also an opinion of a guy who grew up in the suburbs, who comes from an ethnically diverse, culturally diverse family, who grew up in an ethnically diverse and culturally diverse neighborhood. So, there are parts of it you pick up and parts of it you don't, just based on where you grew up. But yeah, I can't, that's another record. When I hear a song with it, I don't turn it off.
Recently, in an interview I did with Maya Wynn, the singer for the supergroup Envy of None, she
Yeah.
mentioned that she ran into Flava Flav in an airport. And my first question was he wearing the clock around his neck? And she said yes. And we're like, wow, he
Oh
must
yeah.
like sleep in it, bathe in it if he was wearing it in
I
the airport.
I ran into him once. I think it was in Vegas, and he was definitely wearing the clock. And I got to meet some of the guys in Japan in 2009. They played at Fuji Rock, and I was working for an artist that also played at Fuji Rock. And it's Public Enemy, so you don't stop and say hi or like effusively spill your guts about how much their work means to you. Like you just give them a strong nod and one of those, and you go about your day. But yeah, it's such a cool important record, especially in the hip hop community. And I feel like nowadays in modern hip hop, they don't get talked about enough. Like I feel like Public Enemy is, like musically, they should be like what Led Zeppelin is to rock and roll bands. Like everybody who's in hip hop should love Public Enemy and say it over and over again. But again, maybe I'm just being a little bit of a homer.
Yeah, this album is widely regarded as one of the greatest and most influential hip hop albums of
Yeah.
all time. And what's cool that ties all your albums together is they actually set out to create the hip hop equivalent of Marvin Gaye's album "What's Going On," which is one of your top five,
Yeah.
which kind of ties it all together. And I listened to the album a few times, and I already knew "Bring the Noise," and I know it from Tony
Anthrax.
Hawk too.
Oh, okay. I was
So
gonna say
it was
Anthrax.
well, it's the Anthrax version featuring Public Enemy. That version is in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 that every kid was obsessed with that game
Yeah.
growing up.
Oh yeah, I played
and,
that game forever.
and that was one of the first songs that kick in. So that's how I was first introduced to that way back in the day.
Well, I remember, I think it was the summer of like 1991 or 1990 when the crossover version with Anthrax came out. And I just remember like all my friends that were into metal loved that song, and all my friends that were into hip hop loved that song. And it was one of the first ones, obviously the Run DMC Aerosmith Walk This Way probably predates it by a couple of years, but it was definitely in the first, kind of sampling of hip hop artists looking at hard rock songs and going like, oh, we can do something with this. And same thing with a metal band going like, hey, we should try something.
So the album, when they were recording it, the album was at the time of recording called Countdown to Armageddon, which I believe is the first song on the album.
Yes.
And then eventually they changed the name to It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back. And that is a line from a song on their first album called Raise the Roof. So I didn't know that that's actually where the title comes from, is from their lyrics.
Well, that's the thing. Like Chuck D has so many great, I guess in hip hop, like one-liners or zingers, or these phrases that just like stick in your, like just stay with you, like even like "Fight the Power" or "Welcome to the Terror Dome," "Bass for Your Face," like all of it. Like he has the ability of not just being like an incredibly socially conscious MC, but he's got all these like incredibly memorable taglines that go in these songs. And like "Get the green, black, and red in," 1, 2, countdown to Armageddon. You're just like, I remember that from when I was like 12, and I'll never forget it.
So Rolling Stone has a list of the 500 greatest albums of all time, and people reference this list all the time. So it's like if an album made that list, it is officially one of the greatest albums of all time. And this shows up at number 15 on the 500 greatest albums of all time. Number 15, which is, I mean, that's as high as you can go, right? Top 15. And it's the highest hip hop album on the list, period. So I believe, if I remember correctly, Kanye West's "My Dark, Beautiful, Twisted Fantasy" is like number 22. Those are the top 2 hip hop albums.
Really, which is weird, because that's like probably not the Kanye album. If I had to pick one, I would pick
from the first 3 you would choose, probably.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Like "Late Registration" or "The College Dropout," like those are iconic as far as what I consider hip hop to be. Obviously he sort of moves more into a gospel / R&B / hip hop melange, which is great because it pushes the art forward. But when I think of classic hip hop, I think Public Enemy every time. Public Enemy and Black Sheep and that New York style hip hop. And obviously the first Snoop Dogg album.
Yeah, so I have 3 reviews from when the album came out that I think you'd enjoy, and then we'll move on to Army of Anyone. So Rolling Stone says it's a Molotov cocktail of nuclear scratching, gnarly minimalist electronics, and revolution rhyme, and they complemented its abrupt sequencing and violent sonic compression of rapid fire samples, slamming jail door percussion, DJ Terminator X's tornado turntable work, and Chuck D's outraged oratory. Then Los Angeles Times commended Chuck D for his rapping, writing that he isn't afraid of being labeled an extremist, and it's that fearless bite or game plan that helps infuse his Black consciousness raps with the anger and assault of punk pioneers like the Sex Pistols and Clash. And then Q says, It's an unimaginably urgent album, seething with vengeful rage and booby-trapped with incendiary musical devices. Q hailed it the greatest rap album of all time, a landmark and a classic. So that's what I've got for that album.
Yeah, and I think Fear of a Black Planet, the album that comes after this, is almost just as good.
Those are the two albums you see from them that are at the very top
Yeah.
of classic hip hop.